Today we commemorate the victims of a staggering crime. Millions of people stolen from their families and communities in Africa, trafficked across the Atlantic, and if they survived the journey, enslaved in the Americas. Millions more were born into bondage, brutally exploited for their labor, and denied their basic humanity. We honor their quiet resilience and courageous acts of open resistance. This global order prevailed for over 400 years. This global order prevailed for over 400 years. This global order prevailed for over 400 years in systems and institutions shaped and enriched by chattel slavery, in social and economic inequalities rooted in past injustices, and in biases that permeate our culture and impact us all. On this International Day of Remembrance of the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, we are called to confront these legacies.
Have you heard of the 400 years? Starting in Genesis chapter 15, Abraham, he falls asleep, and in this dream he receives a word from the Most High Yah. Verse 12, and when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, a horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that your seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward they shall come out with great substance. And then in Acts, Stephen, one of the disciples, he recounts this. In chapter 7, verse 6, and Elohim spoke on this wise, that his seed should sojourn in a strange land, and that they should bring them into bondage, and entreat them evil 400 years. And the nation to whom they shall be in bondage will I judge. If you Google 400 years, a lot comes up. The first thing that came up for me was a song. It says it's by Bob Marley and the Wailers. It's actually by Peter Tosh. The 400 years is in reference to this prophecy, and it's speaking of the bondage of the people of 400 years. Furthermore, 400 years from 1619 to 2019 is what is heavily cited in your Google search results. You will find that there are commemorations by the United Nations, even by our President Trump. There are many articles, the year 2019, that came out speaking of the 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade. I will cite all these articles. Let's take a look at the United Nations. If you go to the United Nations website, you will find slave trade, the General Assembly, in its resolution 62 out of 122 of 17, December 2007, declared March 25th the International Day of Remembrance of the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, to be observed annually. Today is March 24, 2026. This is the first time I'm ever hearing of this. Let's go to H.R. 1242.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to share some reflections on events commemorating the first arrival of enslaved Africans to English colonies to North America, including a forum my colleague Representative Donald McEachin hosted in Richmond earlier this summer and the events that took place on Fort Monroe National Monument last month. It was my great honor, along with Representative Luria, to welcome Congressional Black Caucus Chairwoman Karen Bass and fellow CBC member Lacey Clay to Hampton Roads for the solemn occasion marking the 400th anniversary of the first landing of enslaved Africans to English-speaking North America. The history of our nation cannot be fully understood or appreciated without knowing and acknowledging the stories of those first, what they said was 20 and odd Africans, and the millions who followed them. This was the goal that Senator Kane and I had in mind when we drafted H.R. 1242, a bill to establish a federal 400 Years of African American History Commission. The goal of that commission was to explore ways to commemorate not just the events of 1619, but also to recognize all that has happened since. The City of Hampton and the Commonwealth of Virginia did a tremendous job in organizing events, including those last month, to commemorate and reflect on what happened in 1619.
I want to take a few moments to thank the House for the work they did recently on H.R. 1242. And I want to urge the Senate to take action on this bill as well. So I rise in support of it. It's 1242. It's titled 400 Years of African American History Commission Act. I'm a co-sponsor of this legislation. I worked with my colleagues to pass this act in the House. I look forward to the Senate also passing this bill. I believe it's important for all citizens of the United States to recognize the unique history, sacrifices, and remarkable contributions that African Americans have made to build our great nation. I'm invigorated by this legislative intention to identify and educate the public on the arrival of Africans and their role in building this great country. It is equally important to understand the generational impact that slavery and laws that enforced racial discrimination had on our United States.
400 years. The first slave ship arrived in 1619. 2019, through Congress and the signing of President Trump, we have the 400 Years of African American History Commission Act. And we have the United Nations giving us a date of March 25th to remember the victims of the transatlantic slave trade.
Known as the Door of No Return, it was the last step African slaves took on their soil before being shipped off on slave boats, headed to the New World against their will.
Cheap slave labor producing one main crop, king cotton.
We're talking about the transatlantic slave trade from West Africa to the Americas, which lasted for centuries. 400 years of sweat, blood, and tears. 1619, a ship with 20 African captives landed at Point Comfort in Virginia, ushering a new era of American slavery. This was part of the transatlantic slave trade, a triangular route from Europe to Africa, to the Americas and back to Europe. On the first leg, merchants exported goods to Africa in return for enslaved Africans, gold, ivory, and spices. The middle passage across the Atlantic to the American colonies usually took more than 7 weeks. Africans were sold as slaves to work on tobacco, cotton, and sugar plantations. The goods were then transported to Europe. It is estimated that 12 million Africans were transported, and almost 2 million died on the middle passage. While slavery was abolished in the U.S. in 1865, Roberta says the generational impact still lives on today.
Study the Bible. It is a history book.